Sounds
So
good.
welcome to another episode of Anomalies, a program that's about things that are on the kind of corner or edges of reality. One of the things I've always been interested in is the crop circle phenomenon. And so I was casting about for people to talk to about that phenomena, and I came across Dr. Simeon Hein. So Simeon is our guest today, and I want to thank you, Simeon, for taking time out of your schedule to come visit about crop circles and other things. So welcome to Anomalies.
Hey, thanks a lot, Daniel. Appreciate it.
Sure. Now tell me, you are the head of something called the Institute for Resonances,
Right.
I believe. Tell us what that is.
It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we're looking into the science of resonance behind a lot of different paranormal phenomena and ordinary phenomena, and sort of how they're linked together. Because, resonance is such a fundamental part of our reality, quantum physics and so forth, that it deserves its own study of how information and energy are created and exchanged in our universe.
Would that be a good definition for resonance?
Resonance is frequency, vibration, and it's a fundamental component of quantum mechanics in terms of how energy, everything that exists has a certain frequency to it. I mean, it's not a new age idea that things have a vibration or frequency. It's actually something that's been known since the days of Max Planck and Albert Einstein. And they did a lot of work showing that frequency, wavelength, resonance, and Planck's constant are sort of fundamental components of how our universe, is structured.
How did you get your background is in sociology?
Right.
So how did you get interested in this particular subculture, I guess, to use a sociological term?
It is a subculture, but it's also a kind of branch of science. I mean, you could say that conventional science too is a type of subculture, just subculture that's heavily funded by mainstream organizations. It's a very interesting question. I mean, that's something we could talk about in and of itself, is why certain things seem to us like subcultures. And as a sociologist, that's one of the aspects that's fascinating to me about all of this, is why are certain topics classified as folklore, urban legend, and other topics are considered settled science? And you're a sociologist, so you must think about this too, is what is the difference? Because different sociologists over time have basically made the argument that what is considered mainstream and what is considered fringe is really a matter of who is writing the particular textbooks. That's a whole nother topic and something that I think about as a sociologist. But to answer your question more directly, how I got involved was I had finished my Ph.D. at WSU. I was an assistant professor there, and I had just moved to Boulder, and I heard about this thing called remote viewing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have to tell you, Dan, I have never been exposed to anything like this anywhere in my education. No one ever mentioned remote viewing, ESP, UFOs, Bigfoot, even though Grover Krantz was in the anthropology department, and I could have run into him easily, like you could have, if you were visiting WSU. I mean, he was just one floor, I believe, above us, the anthro department in Wilson Hall there. And I could have easily crossed paths with him in the hallway, in the elevator. I just didn't, these topics were not on my radar back then as a grad student and later an assistant professor at WSU. Honestly, the farthest I got into this was chaos theory and fractal geometry, which fractals are sort of the math and science of, self-similar objects that look kind of similar shapes at any scale, highly fractured, fragmented surfaces, but repeating and have sort of a mathematical constant within them, like snowflakes or your lung structure and many patterns of biological systems, which gets into chaos theory. And that's as far as I went. And I was looking at that in my dissertation of applying chaos theory and fractals, measuring fractal dimensions of systems. I hadn't gone off in this area, Dan. I heard about remote viewing on the community radio station here in Boulder, KGNU. And part of my mind as an academic was skeptical, naturally skeptical that such a thing existed. Remote viewing being the idea that any average person could perceive non-local information from distant people, places, and events. That it wasn't special psychics who I had seen on TV maybe in the 80s with those psychic shows with those three women on who worked with police detectives. I forget what the show was. One of those shows on TV that had the three women psychics, Bevy Yeagers was one of them, who I later met at the IRVA conferences, International Remote Viewing Society. But Dan, I took this as a skeptic, an open-minded skeptic. I didn't think it didn't work. I just didn't think I could do it. And I saw from the results on the page that you could take a target picture, put it in a folder, put it back there or in another room. And somehow using protocols designed by the military to create psychic spies in a classified program, first funded by the CIA, then by DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. You know, you were getting results that I could tell as a statistician were way beyond just random guessing. I don't even think I wanted it to work necessarily. I couldn't explain how it was working, but here you were drawing the pictures of what the target looked like, moving around the target site in your imagination. But somehow when the monitor brought out the picture, you had described it very well. Not every single time, but a lot more than you would expect by chance. And it showed me, if this is true, then there's another channel of energy information that we never learned about. I didn't learn about it. That is non-mechanistic. It's coming. You're not even aware of it, but somehow you're doing it. And that the military had a whole program, a 20-year program. Well, the intelligence agencies in developing this as maybe a defense against Russian psychics initially. And that's what started my whole interest in this area. I didn't believe it was going to be true initially, but it turned out to be true. And I researched it. I went to the conferences, International Remote Viewing Association, as I mentioned, many times. And I got to meet people who had been in the military program and look at the data and the work they had done. It's really astounding when you see these sessions. So that's how I got involved.
Well, I give you a lot of credit for moving from kind of a more scientific background to something that's a bit more fringe, because a lot of people who are pretty hardcore scientists won't have anything to do with something that smacks of being paranormal. So I think you deserve a lot of credit for doing that. Just to kind of connect here on a sociological level, one of the things that really interests me about all this paranormal stuff is the idea of the social construct of reality. Reality is what people say it is. And I think kind of what I've learned is there's a lot of misinformation out there, and can kind of really put the dampers on any kind of really investigation of what the actual natural world is all about. So I think that's important. We want to talk about crop circles, but one of the things that I want to connect with you on about remote viewing is I saw an interview with you, and it was really kind of a profound kind of remote viewing experience. And I want to see if I have this accurately, that you remote viewed the extinction of the dinosaurs. Is that accurate?
That was one of the practice targets we had. Obviously, it's a non-verifiable target.
How would you verify that? And you wouldn't, I guess.
No, let me show you. Let me, Daniel, show you an example of from my book, Opening Minds. I had to write a book about it because it was so astounding. I got into crop circles from seeing them in remote viewing targets, and you can kind of see the target picture, and then the viewer is able to draw it surprisingly without seeing it ahead of him. It's Washington Monument. I'll hold it so the background is not obscuring it. And
maybe that's something you can send us
Yeah,
some of
you
these.
can just see examples here. These were the sort of examples that proved to me that this worked just like the intelligence agencies found out, SRI over at Palo Alto, Stanford Research
Mhm.
Institute, as it was called at the time. And it was these sort of verifiable targets that showed me that there's really, these people are getting more information. It doesn't come across that well in the back. I can see that. But so just to go back to something you said, though, I have to comment on this. This is not a fringe topic. It's perceived that way by mainstream science. There's a difference.
Right.
Because if you look at the history of science, I encourage everyone to read James Wotton's book, The Discovery of Science. Just about any new idea that we take for granted now was at one point fringe. And before it goes mainstream, it starts off as something that's, ridiculed. Just look at the history of the discovery of cosmology, the solar system, the universe, and Copernicus, Galileo, that whole time period. They were challenging. They weren't called scientists back then, as you know. They were called natural philosophers.
Or maybe heretics.
Yeah, either natural philosophers or heretics. They came up against huge obstacles to presenting anything that challenged the Vatican or Aristotle. And you know this as a sociologist. There was this belief in that time period up to the modern era, we call the modern era, is that evidence wasn't important. It was matching up what we observed to what Aristotle had said. That's all science was back then. If Aristotle had said it wasn't true, then it wasn't true. And one of the very good case studies of this was the discovery of meteorites. These were considered to be something that came out of volcanoes or created by thunder and lightning hitting stones. There was a belief that nothing could come from beyond the moon because Aristotle said that everything beyond the moon, the so-called superlunary area, was static. And so you've probably heard of Ernst Chladni, I think it was Austrian acoustic physicist. He did a lot of work in what's called cymatics, which is how vibration and sound, we're talking about resonance, how those are related. Those people who believed that was not considered to be real. Meteorites were considered to be a hoax, and they were all confiscated on the orders of the French Academy of Sciences. I'm sure you've heard of this. They basically said there are no stones in the sky. Stones cannot fall from the sky. There are, because Aristotle said it's impossible. So back then, things were ruled by dogma, and we consider ourselves to be modern people because we look at evidence. That's what kind of the modern idea is. But not everybody did look at evidence back then. It wasn't considered important what was in front of you. It was considered, does it match what Aristotle said? I mean, there were beliefs like, and a lot of people believe this, that if you rubbed a magnet with garlic, it would lose its magnetism. And everybody believed this. Even Kepler, the famous astronomer physicist, believed that. Because it didn't matter if you did it and it didn't happen. It just because it was considered that you weren't rubbing it the right way. So, and then there was something else. If you rub the magnet again, it would become magnetic again. But these were believed for hundreds and hundreds of years. So many myths. So I'm just saying this because looking at these topics, even the word paranormal is not really a meaningful word. Paranormal means we don't understand how it works. Magnetism was considered paranormal. You know what was considered paranormal? Vacuum spaces in glass bottles, because Aristotle had said there's no vacuums in the natural order of things. So you see what my point is that the definition of things changes from time to time. Like I started studying cold fusion as part of this just because it was such a controversial topic in the US. And I found that these experiments that Fleischmann and Pons had done were repeated by many other people in many other countries. It's just that the institutions that we live around, for whatever reason, didn't find it convenient to believe in cold fusion. Some people think, Daniel, it's because the hot fusion reactors are such an expensive thing. You get a lot of grant money for your hot fusion reactors. I mean, billions and billions to try to get it to work. You might not want a competitor's product to work if your funding is dependent on these kind of more expensive, very complex systems. In fact, there's a joke. in the cold fusion community that the Russians gave their tokamak technology to the West just to waste their time. The hot fusion devices that, it's very hard. You got to create a magnetic field and temperatures as hot as the sun, and it lasts for like a trillionth of a second. The record isn't, I think, a couple seconds a few months ago. Daniel, ever since I've been a kid, we were told that fusion was coming. It's almost here. I heard this in the 80s. We're a long ways from the 80s and it's not here yet. But cold fusion is something that seems to be reproducible and not always easy to reproduce, but it seems to be a real thing. So I'm interested as a sociologist of how things are labeled. Anyway, to answer your question, I know I'm skirting around a little bit. I got involved with RV, and then that led to looking at some of these subjects to see, could you get information about it that we don't actually know about now, like the destruction of the dinosaurs. So you're right. I did do that target, and that was the one where, again, these targets are done blind, just so you know. You don't have any advanced information. I did get these dinosaur-like creatures in the water moving around, and I saw something coming down that created an explosion, and everything was turned to dust really quickly. And then I found out that the target was destruction of the dinosaurs. Seemed to be an accurate session, but targets like that, unlike these ones I just showed you, the Washington Monument, you don't really know. We do have information that the Chicxulub crater off of, the Gulf of Mexico, somewhere in there, there's evidence that could have been what caused the extinction of most of the dinosaurs. But you
That
can
must have been a really profound thing to
Yeah.
witness or to reflect on anyway.
Yeah. It's very interesting, and it gets you wondering, did I really view what really caused the destruction of dinosaurs? Did I view a storyline? Without verification, we don't really know. But we know that the military did use this technique to find things that they couldn't know any other way. The most famous example being the 1979 defection by a Libyan pilot with Soviet Badger bomber, I believe. He crashed, he ejected over what's now called the Democratic Republic of the Congo. What is it called now? Zaire?
Yeah, Zaire.
Yeah. So they tasked remote viewers at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and SRI to look for this. And their cue, I've asked people who worked on this project, well, I said, what did they tell you? They say somewhere in Zaire, there's a plane. I mean, no, a plane went down in Africa where that's the target, and it's written on a piece of paper. Africa is a huge place, as you know.
Yeah, it is.
But they got it within 15 miles. And that thing was underneath rainforest cover, that plane. They used dowsing, other map locational techniques. And another viewer saw it by a stream that was running red from iron deposits. And they sent in a Delta Force team under the radar and landed at this location. And it wasn't very far away. They were within 15 miles of it. They saw people coming out of the rainforest with wreckage and stuff. So they knew they were in the right area. But I mean, the actual cases of this showed it worked. And that's why it kept getting funded for 2 decades. And when it was canceled, based on what I've been able to look at, I mean, Jessica Utz, who was the president of the American Statistical Association, at one point, did research for Congress and concluded that looking at just a very few sessions, it seemed that the viewers were getting more information than they would be if they were guessing, like I told you. Like 1 out of 3 descriptions would be correct versus 1 out of 4 if you were just guessing at it. So it really did seem to work, and it was canceled because, like you're saying, the perception is, what is the perception? Paranormal, fringe, and that's in Congress. When you're thinking about reelection, people are going to, your opponents are going to use this against you. Oh, you funded paranormal research. Well, you've been following the news, right? UAP, Navy sightings, all this. What's fringe? Here's my point, and I'm not talking a lot about this, but it's something I have thought about for a couple of decades now. So thanks for asking the question. What's fringe 1 decade could become mainstream later on. It's just a question of perspective.
Dave and I belong to something called the Olympia 14 Society, and if you're
Sure.
familiar with Charles Fort, and one of our little bumper sticker kind of things that we haven't turned into a bumper stickers, our role is to make the paranormal normal, because it seems like if you have it more, some of these topics is more a part of mainstream conversation, there's less of a taboo in talking about them. And yeah, I can relate to much of what you're saying. Let's go back to the connection between remote viewing and crop circles,
Yeah, yeah.
because crop circles are a very interesting phenomena for me. So talk about that. Yeah, talk about how you saw. Yeah, just talk about that. How did you make that connection?
It started with a RV target of a formation in the UK where a lot of these crop circles showed up. They've been in many different countries. It was the Triple Julia set at Windmill Hill in near Marlborough, UK. I didn't know what a crop circle was in 1996. I mean, you're just doing a target at the end, you show a picture and the monitor says it's a crop circle. I said, what? What's a crop circle? I never heard that.
Well, that,
There's a lot of wheat around Pullman. I still never heard of a crop circle. So, I did get some interesting things in that session about weird energies and something interesting going on about shapes. And so I decided to get my feedback by going over there with a guy from the Denver area that gave crop circle tours. And I went there in 1997, open-minded. The first crop circle I saw was the Coke snowflake fractal shape at Silbury Hill. The Silbury Hill is a very old man-made earth mound, but very tall, like the largest earth mound in Europe, size of a small hill. And it was made 5,000 years ago. There was this beautiful crop circle, and I was interested in exploring it. And I didn't know what was making them at the time, but what's interesting was, this is something that caught my attention early on. Talking to people around there, they said that their batteries and cameras would act strangely in crop circles. And we did see this. I saw this in 1997 at a place called Danebury Hill Fort. And the person I was with, Ron Russell, he put his camcorder down in the center of the formation. And it didn't work anymore. In fact, it was hot. All of a sudden it got hot and it wasn't working. He sent it back to Sony and they said the solder joints had melted on the power supply. Now, if that just happened once, you would think, okay, so the cameras failed. But I started seeing this a lot because I got interested. I came back the next year with him, and the next year, eventually he turned the tour over to me in 2006. So I was giving the crop circle tour. I couldn't see what was it about these crop circles, no matter who made them, even human-made ones, that were causing battery and camera failure. And it was it's something I'm still studying to this day in other types of systems. Why do you get balls of light around crop circles, strange phenomena, cameras acting weird, even time-space anomalies? People would report that they thought they were only in there 20 minutes and it was 2 hours, watches stopping, strange stuff. I don't know if it's paranormal. You could call it that. That's kind of the general term we use, but what does cause cameras and batteries to fail around coherent shapes like that? Interesting question.
Kind of electromagnetic field that sounds like might be at play there. The first time I ever heard the term crop circle was really relevant to an old engraving of something called a mowing devil. Are you familiar with that? So that was an attempt to explain crop circles, but I don't know if that was more just mythology and maybe certainly not part of what's going on contemporaneously. What do you know about the origin of that that kind of a icon of the mowing devil?
Yeah, so that comes from a woodcut from, I believe, the 1600s. And the story was that the farmhand had gotten angry at the farmer. And at the time, they thought maybe the fight between them had caused the mowing devil to come out that night and create patterns in the wheat. That's all we know about it, is from this woodcut in the description. Is it one of the early descriptions of crop circles in the UK, or did the farmhand get angry at the farmer and vandalize his fields? But there is that picture of the devil with the scythe going around making circles in the wheat. I wouldn't be surprised if these have existed for a long time, because and here's one thing that's very interesting as a sociologist. People like to be right. They like to feel that their explanation is correct, and they want to defend that, especially in a group of people. So there's some people think, oh, it's got to be all made by ETs or extraterrestrials because no one's ever caught out there,
Right.
making them. To this date, people haven't been caught out there. At the same time, I met human circle makers starting around 2000, and they invited me to go out and watch them make circles at night. It's partly why I wrote Opening Minds. But it does seem, honestly, that there's both types, unexplainable types, some that are made by whirlwinds, vortices, plasmas, and human types, and some are related to flying saucers that people say they have seen. I interviewed a witness who saw this happen in Usk, Washington, in northeast Washington state, your state. She was picking blackberries with her brother, huckleberries. There's a huckleberry season in parts of Washington, and she did, and this became part of my book, Black Swan Ghosts, by the way. I can't quite see it. Black Swan Ghosts, yeah. And so she said she saw there a disc came over that was doing the classic falling leaf sort of wobble, and there was two other people there, a mom and her son, and they left and called the police. They called the sheriff, but this thing was wobbling, and then as it left, it went right over the meadow. And Louise told me that it flattened the meadow, it flattened the plants. And I asked her, well, how flat? She said, flat as a pancake. Sounds similar to what you see in crop circles. It's not a crop circle, it's just a straight line through the meadow. But there's an eyewitness I talked to. She's passed on now, but I put her video on the blackswanghost.com website. Anybody can watch it. And some of her children looked at it and really thanked me for preserving her memory in video, because they didn't have any video of Louise. But here she is talking for 45 minutes about this UFO around the huckleberries. And the military came up from Spokane, she said, cordoned the area off. They couldn't even get back in the next day because the huckleberries were ripe. They tried to go up there again, and the military had cordoned the area off, had dug these tank traps in the road. This is how seriously they took it. Anyway, she's a witness who described a flying disc affecting plant matter. So I would imagine, Daniel, there's a variety of things that do create crop circles. No doubt, I saw a lot of people make a lot of crop circles, really good ones too. And some people don't want to believe that's true, but I've been out there making them with these circle makers. We did it in Washington State. We paid a farmer north of Pullman. We found a farmer and paid him to make a circle in his field. He actually helped stomp the wheat down. He was very curious too. So we've made a lot of experimental circles, and we found that the man-made ones do create anomalous effects too, on cameras, on batteries. So it's something to do with the shape, and the pattern and so forth that does it. I've speculated it's something to do with dark matter, the material in the universe that clumps around objects like the Earth, and perhaps those spiral shapes organize this dark matter, dark energy. It's open to speculation, but it's definitely a real phenomena. And as I'm saying, people want it to be one thing or the other. It's quite complex. It's a mix of things. It's a fascinating subject. Fascinating.
I was going to say that and I hate to use the word consensus, but that's what comes to mind. There is somewhat of a thought that most crop circles are man-made. And I don't know how you answer that question. Would you agree with that statement or not?
Most crop circles in recent years in the UK are man-made, because I know that it's called participant observation.
Right.
In our field of sociology and anthropology, you go out there and you participate. It's called participant observation. I don't particularly like going out in farmers' fields without asking them, but there was the only way to find the truth. It was to go with these circle makers and watch them do what they did. Um, and the farmers sometimes put up collection boxes. They can make a lot of money by putting up collection boxes too. And I'm not saying I agree with trespassing on other people's property, but I did go out with them on occasions where the farmers weren't paid to see if they really could do this, and they could. So getting to know these circle makers, they were very talented. I mean, some of them made these sand patterns in Wales. This look like crop circles, right? These are the same people doing that. So
it's a shame that Dave is on here with us because he witnessed a formation similar to that in the sand on the Oregon coast when he was there on a trip, and he was very intrigued by that.
Yeah.
You probably have heard the story about Doug and Dave, the two old British guys. So they're somewhat of a stereotype for crop circle makers. But who are these people, and how would you describe the process that they use to make very intricate crop circles? Maybe talking about some trade secrets here, but what would you say about that?
Well, they're very strange people that like to go out at night and push wheat down with a stomper board. These are curious people like us. These are people that would be watching this podcast, listening to it. The people that I knew who made them, like Doug and Dave, one of them, I think, Dave Chorley and Doug Bauer. Right. I think they've passed on now, both of them. One of them was from Australia, where he saw the Tully saucer nest. The Tully saucer nests were cases where flying discs were seen near marshes, and they pushed the marsh grasses down in a circle. And he came over to the UK, I believe it was Doug Bauer. He was an artist, and he wanted to see if he could recreate what he had seen in Australia from, apparently, you can look them up, Tully saucer nests. You can see these old grainy black and white photos of what looked like crop circles, small. He wanted to see if he could reproduce it. And I think he was astounded that there was so much interest from the media. It created a media stir. And artists like attention. And the more attention it got, the more he decided to make them. So Doug and Dave were not just guys from the pub fooling around out there after a few beers with their boards and their ropes. I mean, they were, but they were really interested in doing this from a perspective of art. And the most interesting thing was, one of them said at the very end of a BBC interview, we always felt like something else was making us do it. And, you could believe them or not, but having talked to the circle makers myself, human circle makers, there were often times they told me they just felt compelled to go out there and do this. So what that tells me, assuming they're telling us the truth, I mean, they would be going to sleep and they'd get a pattern in their mind and feel like they had to go out and make it in the wheat, is that there's just larger forces than just individual human ego minds at work here. And it seems like that's not totally out of line from what we know how artists work. Is you're inspired by something, and in this case it could be coherent energy forms, something mysterious. It's not just for the thrill of hoaxing, because they don't call it hoaxing, Dan. They call it natural magic. Some of them do. Natural magic. They really believe they're creating a natural space, a magical space for people to have some sort of amazing experience in. And that's why they didn't want to sign their name to them. They want people to go out there and experience something different. And I did experience something different. If I had known these were man-made from the start, I might not have gone over. But having gone over there, I did experience myself the camera failure, the battery failure. I wrote about it in Opening Minds, showing the devices that stop working as you walk into these formations. It's just wheat organized in a shape. I went back some of the years after the crop had been cut down just to see, is it the space itself and not the crop circle? Good question, right? Nope, didn't have any electrical or any strange effects when the wheat wasn't there. So it's something about them creates these very interesting patterns. And I think it shows us that energy moves in interesting ways. And again, as a sociologist, people have asked me, why didn't you study this as a type of like folklore, urban legend? But you could equally see mainstream science as a type of folklore too, right? I mean, that is judgmental. And I would argue, yeah, there is urban legend. It's the idea that only the mechanistic way of explaining things is science. You could observe what's going on and see if you can create theories that would explain it. And I think by us making our own circles, especially one we made in Kansas, in a small formation. I mean, our photos did not come out well from those Kansas formation 2002 on the way back from the, we had permission to make a small one. We made one on the way back from the IRVA conference in Austin, Texas. And you can look at my website, cropcirclescience.com. You can see the pictures. Those pictures were really, there's an energy there, like a static or something. All the pictures, almost all the pictures were affected. And it's a manual camera. It never did that before or afterwards.
So I'm compelled to ask about the more complex crop circles, because I can imagine going back to Doug and Dave, two old guys with them boards and ropes. But it's hard for me to imagine that process would result in anything very sophisticated. So for some of the more sophisticated designs, how are those made? How do people make those?
You just get more people. When you go out there and you start making basic shapes, it's just a function of geometry. I just learned that these circle makers back then, they're not doing it as much as they used to. They're just very good. These are I have to go back to your earlier question. Some of these people like Dave, Doug Bauer, these are graphics artists, professionals. They do graphics artists for a living. They know a lot about graphic art. And they know, when you take a finite space, there's only so many ways you can divide it up, and you often get symmetrical patterns. You can do it on a piece of paper a couple inches across, or in a field, or on a beach. It's the same thing. You get ropes, you have lasers, you create straight lines. And I've seen them do things that I didn't think were, I did not think it was possible, but humans can do this if they're good at it. And these are people that, done many circles over the years. They can do it. I've seen them do it. To make one like this particular pattern, now I wasn't there for this, but based on having talked to people who told me they were involved in making this, and I have no reason not to believe them, it just takes more people and a lot of planning. You have a pattern that's computer generated, and it's already calculated the distances between the centers of the different circles and how you would go about making it. They may practice ahead of time, but I think we underestimate human ingenuity, because humans can, if they put their mind to it, they can find a way to do things that we didn't think they could do.
I remember when I first became familiar with crop circles, it seemed like there was a group of people out there called the BLT Research Foundation. You familiar with them?
Yeah. The
Livengood.
Burke, Levengood, and Talbot.
Yeah. So they were doing some studies of the actual, and I guess that would depend on the crop that they were doing the study of, but they were noticing some abnormalities in the nodes of the plants that could only be caused by overheating. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to be able to make that with a board necessarily. So how did you view their research? Did they add anything to the quest to find out what was really causing the crop circles?
Well, yeah, in a sense, they got us to ask. I saw many of their presentations early on, and it got me very interested in the subject of, what was causing these elongated nodes and so forth. It wasn't microwave radiation. You can't rule that out, but we did see this in our own formations, that the nodes got elongated. The plants are exposed to the heat of the sun. Plus, there's a lot of static electricity once the formation is there. So my view of it is that in many of the formations, once you put a coherent pattern, symmetrical pattern, even like this sand pattern, if you put that in wheat in the sun, you're going to get energy being organized in new ways. It's not as much what created it that creates those anomalous effects. It's the coherency of the shape afterwards. That's my view of it. So I don't think BLT's interpretation was correct. It doesn't mean that they didn't contribute to moving us forward, but I don't believe that they're created, directly by microwaves. Now, I can't rule that out because I have seen some that look like they were created by a plasma vortices, a plasma vortex. I saw this in 2010, and I'm including that in the latest book that I'm working on about some of the strange magnetic and electrical effects of plasma of vortices. So some of those could have been formed by, I was sitting in a wheat field once, and this whirlwind came up behind me at East Kennet near Silbury Hill. I was just sitting there. I mean, it was a fierce little whirlwind. You wouldn't expect this in the UK, right? But there it was spinning around. It didn't create a crop circle. I didn't see that. It would have been cool if that happened. But I did see a very strong micro tornado. I could hear it. And I wouldn't be surprised if that got strong enough that would create all sorts of interesting energetic charges of the air molecules colliding with each other from the force of the tornado. Those can create very strong forces. That would probably be enough to push wheat down. And it might even create some ball lightning or other types of condensed energy matter that maybe it does create some microwaves. But I do have to say, I do think that once you put the circle there, you will find some of these effects that BLT were attributed to microwaves.
I remember seeing a YouTube video, talk about the ball lightning, where and I believe it was in England, where there was this kind of light, white orb moving through this field. And after it moved through the field, a crop circle formed. So maybe that would be consistent with the idea of ball lightning, although I don't think I've ever seen ball lightning.
Ball lightning is a fascinating topic. I've been studying it a lot in context, looking at cold fusion. My interest in cold fusion, again, was given that there's a lot of labs that have reproduced what Fleischmann and Pons did, including the US Navy, okay? They have applied for patents in cold fusion. So if it's really junk science, as we were told by MIT and President Bush's Presidential Commission on Cold Fusion, the first Bush, well, why is the US military getting patents in something that we're being told is junk science? Doesn't make sense. Ball lightning is the core of a lot of processes, and you do see it in and around the fields of the UK. I saw one myself once. There was another person there. We both saw it at the same time. It didn't last very long. It was just floating above the ground, and it was near a crop circle, but not in the field itself. But we both saw it. It looked like a small glowing blue grapefruit. It was really strange. Well, I've been studying this a lot recently. There's a group called the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, a nonprofit group led by Bob Grenier, and originally from the UK. And they look at ball lightning. It turns out that's what makes cold fusion work, is micro ball lightning. And a lot of people have been saying this for a long time. And it is seen in and around crop circles. Now, not all those videos we saw of the balls of light creating crop circles, some of those turned out to be animations created by people that were very good at making animation. But that doesn't mean that doesn't happen some of the time. And ball lightning is seen in and around crop circles. It is seen in and around UFOs and Bigfoot sightings. And it's a very interesting phenomenon. It's another state of matter. And the new book I'm working on, called Dark Matter Monsters, is about the role of ball lightning in a lot of so-called paranormal phenomena. Is that when you get alternative, what's that?
Including cryptids
that's what the book's about, is why the book, and you can go to the website now. I just put it up a couple of days ago. The book won't be out till July 1st, but the website's up, darkmattermonsters.com. That is what the book is about, is having been in crop circles and seen this anomalous phenomena, and I started encountering Bigfoot witnesses here in Colorado in the Rockies many years ago. But what I was actually most interested in was not actually just kind of like the crop circles, not saying exactly what Bigfoot creatures are, escaped gorillas, undiscovered primates like Grover Krantz thought, or, undiscovered type of relic humanoid. I can't answer that question 100%, but what was interesting to me is, why do you get balls of light around these cryptids?
Right.
And yeah, so I thought, and this is what I'm writing about in my newer book. Well, is it the same thing we saw in crop circles, or is it entirely different energy phenomena? And I could be wrong, but I'm arguing here that ball lightning is ball lightning, whether it's around Bigfoot, crop circles, or UFOs. It has the same effects of wiping out cameras, batteries, electronics, wristwatches. I've talked to the witnesses who've seen Bigfoot around here, Estes Park area, Bailey, so forth. I've been to some of the conferences around here. It's the same thing. Batteries stop working, cameras stop working, cars won't start temporarily. So I think what we're dealing with, what we call paranormal phenomena, a lot of it is another state of matter that I think we've seen that the US military has been interested since the 1950s. A lot of these ball lightning studies were funded by the Air Force going back to the 1950s, Winston Bostick, and other researchers, Eric Davis. Now, when you look at some of these more recent reports, they're like half of them is redacted. It means whited out. They use white out now instead of black, like they did with Project Blue Book. So speaking again as a sociologist about what's fringe and paranormal or mainstream, why is this classified research? You can find patents from the US Navy, Lockheed Martin, and the US Air Force is funding it since the 50s. Why do you find this ball lightning in so many different phenomena? And why haven't we been talking about it? It's because it's been classified, because it obviously has some sort of military applications. Now, I don't actually experiment with ball lightning myself. I don't have a lab anywhere. It's just a common denominator in a lot of these phenomena. And I had decided, I have to write a book about this from the point of view of a sociologist looking at stigma, right? Sociocultural stigma. You know about this. So is it possible that this has been sort of a classified technology since the 50s, which is why it's so convenient to call these phenomena paranormal? Now, this is me arguing this. I have to do this as a sociologist. I have to argue that we've been deliberately stigmatizing these phenomena, just like Project Blue Book did with, UFO sightings out of Wright-Patterson, that there's, on one hand, a very deep government military interest in these topics. And yet at the surface level, we associate it with what? Fringe topics, National Enquirer, right? You can't have it both ways. It's either metaphysics or it's real. And if it's metaphysics, why would it be classified? Why would you have defense contractors applying for patents in it? You kind of see where I'm going with this. I'm not arguing there's a conspiracy here. I'm not really a conspiracy theorist. I'm arguing as a basic Max Weberian sociologist, and I wrote my dissertation about Max Weber, is that when you have certain interest groups, within bureaucracies that want to kind of take advantage of new technologies, rationalization, as Max Weber called it, you're going to want to stigmatize it and kind of on the surface level discredit it, because you want to keep it all for yourself. And that's what I think is going on here in a nutshell. This is all really powerful stuff ever since Nikola Tesla.
There's also a monetary aspect of this that I think becomes convenient to protect monetary interests from being disrupted by not exposing people to other forms of energy that might be more environmentally sound. So I think you're right.
Exactly right.
There's like some conflict theory going on in here.
I think so. I think so. And I think the classic sociologists that you and I know about, from Weber to Durkheim to Zimmel and many others, would ask this sort of question if they were on this interview: is are these discoveries, would it disrupt existing industries if we just
Really?
had new energy technology? I think the answer is yes. And I think that's what's been going on behind discrediting a lot of these phenomena. Look at UFOs. We have Project Blue Book right up the street from me. They hired Edward Condon at the University of Colorado to issue the Condon report. And we know now from, the people who were on the Condon committee, half of them quit because they thought the whole thing was rigged. They had already come to their conclusion for a $500,000 grant. Now that's—
It was rigged. It was rigged, wasn't it, basically?
It was rigged. And $500,000 in 1967, that's a lot of money. That's millions of dollars today. To do what? Say that UFOs have no scientific significance, no military implications. Basically, move along, folks, nothing to see here. Now, at the same time, we know now from OSAP and ATIP programs within the Defense Intelligence and Pentagon that they're still spending millions of dollars nowadays that we know about in these programs to study UFOs. It was Hal Puthoff, one of the founders of remote viewing at SRI, that told us at one of these meetings, and here's me as a sociologist or just listen to it. He said, yeah, sure. The government at a surface level said they stopped looking into UFOs when Project Blue Book was ended in, I believe, 1972. But they had a lot of classified programs that were still looking at it. So this is sort of, again, we can talk about this in a very interesting way. It's sort of dysfunctional. It's schizophrenic. At one level, the public's being told nothing going on here. You saw ice crystals, flocks of geese, and planet Venus or something like this bouncing off of swamp gas. And at the same time, they have these deeply classified programs, which Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon have talked about. You know about this in the audience, is sure about this. New York Times articles. I mean, this to me is classic sociology. It's the pot calling the kettle black. And that's what I think paranormal phenomena is. It's a real phenomena, other states of matter, fascinating stuff in and of itself. Coherent matter, that's what it's called. That's what the Lockheed Martin pattern is. A lot of this coherent matter and ball lightning can do a lot of really interesting things that, we're still understanding. And it could be linked to other universes, multiverses, and things like this. But the reality of the situation is it's been deliberately discredited so that someone else, as you're saying, gets the advantages of the technology.
Right.
Or keeps the existing system, the way Veblen would say, our sociologist. What did he call it? The established interest. I forgot his word. What did Veblen call it? He had a name for these things. The status quo deliberately preventing new ideas from coming forward.
Well, it seems like it's almost Marxist in a way to me. It's kind of class oriented, monetary preservation for class interest. I want to be conscientious of our time here because you probably have other things to do besides talk to me. So I've got a couple of more questions for you, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. The one thing I'm kind of interested in, and you brought up, there could be a variety of different causes for the crop circle phenomena.
Yeah.
And you, as I recall, you didn't exclude ETs or extraterrestrials. So what's your perspective on that? And what evidence is there that some of these formations might be caused by beings from other dimensions, planets? What's your perspective on that?
Well, we do have, again, the Tully saucer nest from Australia, where flying discs were seen around crop circle-like patterns in marsh grasses. And you do get these UFO sightings around crop circles. I kind of look at it more from a frequency point of view. I'm not saying that they don't make some of these, at least the simple formations. The more complicated formations, things that look like, what's behind me in this beach and whales formation, those tend to be man-made because they're very complex. They take a long time to make. And those are not the ET ones, as far as I know, in my experience. the simpler formations, simple circles and so forth, that would be caused by the propulsion system of the craft. Those might be, that's my perspective. Now, I could be totally wrong. I'm happy to be proved wrong on this. That's my experience, is the simpler, what we call the original phenomena, either plasma vortices or UFOs, flying discs, like Luis Voves up in Usk, Washington, describes it flattening the plants. So there does seem to be an ET connection to it. But speaking as someone that's looked into, the multiverse physics, it's possible that when you create shapes like that, you're sort of creating a different frequency, which would show you other aspects of reality that you normally don't see. It's just like putting on glasses that show you a different spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum. And so when you do start going into those spaces, you do see other things that maybe you didn't see before. And I got to tell you another aspect of it, Dan. Having talked to the human circle makers, what really interested me was when they said that when they would be out there at night, it's pitch black. You're out there from 12 to 5 a.m., something like that, 4:30 a.m. That's when the sun starts coming up there in the UK in the summer, around 4:30. They reported to me that they would see balls of light over the formations they were making. They were sometimes chased out of fields by balls of light. Really strange. Yeah, what is doing that? They reported small triangular craft over their formations, and phenomena like that, and not that rare either. So, is it kind of acting like a strange attractor? I'm kind of having a little fun with the word from chaos theory, strange attractor. Is, once you have these shapes there, does it pull in some of these phenomena? Does it create connections? No doubt that there are flying saucers seen around these formations. Whether they actually create them directly, at least the big ones, it's another question entirely. But I'm happy to be proved wrong. If someone can actually show me evidence of these craft making these, because I'll tell you, looking at a lot of the evidence, we found that some of it was, animated again. Now, but here's the thing about it. The topic of crop circles does seem connected to UFOs because they're both kind of, for our point of view, common sense point of view, kind of strange. So it does make sense that people would associate it, maybe the idea kind of connects in people's minds. That doesn't mean that they're not connected in some way. I see a lot of these phenomena really related to the physics of the multiverse. So it's not like it's totally wrong. It's just more of like a metaphor, in my view, as a sociologist. Of course, I'm happy to look at evidence that shows a craft actually making these. And some of the small ones do seem to have been made that way, like the Tully saucer nest.
I guess it's a bit like you mentioned Bigfoot, of course, living in Washington State. I think that's the state animal, if people would actually conclude that it exists. But there's a correlative versus a causal kind of a thing between orbs and
there you
UFOs and Bigfoot. So
Thank
who
you.
knows?
Thank you. Yeah.
One more question for you, and then we'll kind of wrap this up.
Sure.
So one of the videos that I saw you giving an interview about related to what's going on in current events, what's happening in the Ukraine. And I think it was a story about a UFO that went on, and this might have been when Ukraine was still part of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
A UFO went over some kind of military installation. And like in the United States, either activated or deactivated some thermonuclear missiles.
Absolutely. No, it's a fascinating story. It's something I wrote about in Black Swan Ghosts. I happened to run into, at a UFO conference, a man named Dr. Richard Hoover, who had worked at NASA. He was an astrobiologist, and he studied fossils in meteorites, literal diatoms and unicellular organisms in meteorites. And this was so controversial at NASA, they asked him to stop presenting at conferences. Can you imagine? Now I spent a couple of days with him at this conference in was it 2016 or so, in outside of Scottsdale, Arizona. at one of the Native American reservations, Fountain Hills. And he said he was 100% confident these had been living organisms, just as if you found them in rocks on Earth, diatoms and simple or, simple single multiple cellular organisms, that these were fossils in carbonaceous meteorites coming out from space. And NASA, he quit. NASA, he said, I'm not going to be censored like this. Another case of censorship like Fleischman and Pond. Yeah, so he said to me in the course of the conversation that when he was at Huntsville, Alabama, he had been asked to spend a day with a scientist, Muradin Kamakov, who studied polycapillary optics, which are used in satellites and so forth. And Kamakov, who had run the Kurchatov Institute, he was in charge of 60,000 people for nuclear related sciences. In the Soviet Union at the time, everything nuclear was in one institute: nuclear missiles, nuclear power, research. And Kamakov told Hoover, all of a sudden they're just having pickles and beer. He said, we had a UFO come over one of our missile installations in the Ukraine in 1982. In the town, the name of the town doesn't exist anymore. I looked it up. It could be in several places. I believe it was in the Ural Mountains or something like this. And Kamakov said that the huge UFO had come over the base and initiated the launch sequence of some of their missiles. And it counted down for 15 seconds and stopped at a few seconds to launch. People's hairs turned gray. They couldn't stop it. And you're right, this happened in the US. At some installations, the missiles were neutralized, as Robert Salas has talked about at Maelstrom in Montana. Yeah, it happened in a lot of places, Dan. It's a very serious issue because this is another thing that's never been discussed. And another thing that the Condon Committee was wrong about. These events started happening in the 60s in the US, and the Condon Committee didn't even report about it. How could that not be of military and scientific significance? That objects that people saw, either glowing objects or, is the case of the Ukraine incident, a huge disc. There are interviews with some of the missile guards who were at the Ukrainian site, and they said it was 5 stories tall. Wow. Huge. Yeah, and that would fit with what Kumakov said is a huge object. Hovering there, and your missiles are going to launch sequence. They're getting taken down 10 at a time. And now I've talked to Robert Salas because he came to Boulder. He said each missile is on its own electronic platform. They're not connected, but here they are all down. That's unheard of for these missiles. And many other people. I went to the citizen hearing in Washington, D.C. in 2013 at the National Press Club with about 40 witnesses over from all over the world.
Was this Stephen Greer's?
It was Stephen Bassett's.
Bassett, okay.
Paradigm Research Group. Yeah. Just get to talk to people in this area. And there were missile security guards, including David Schindele, who experienced the same thing at Minot Air Force Base in, I believe, 1966. And what do you think they're told after these events happened? It never happened.
Right, don't talk about it.
Yeah, don't talk about it, not even to the missile technicians that show up to repair the missile systems, the parts of the launch process that have gone down, that why they're offline. He said it was unheard of for 10 missiles to go offline. He was one of these launch control officers in a facility like this, and it's a centralized facility with 10 Minuteman missiles, at least back then it was. And they're all going down. He said, unheard. Well, they told him not to talk about it. Even the missile technician that showed up the next morning couldn't say anything to them because they'd already been told, never repeat this, not even to your wife, not to your sweetie, nobody. It never happened. And they didn't talk about it, some of them, till the citizen hearing. So again, this is more part of control, stigma. It's a fascinating chapter in US history and Soviet history, and probably to this day, it's still happening, but we wouldn't be told about it. It's at the highest level of national security if your missile systems aren't going to work. I guess now in the situation we're in with the Ukraine and Russia, I guess we'd feel a little better knowing that these missiles aren't going to launch properly. But yeah, but that's the story. And I did, I wrote, Richard Hoover edited the chapter about that to make sure it was accurate. This is what Kumakov told him, and you can look up the videos on YouTube. It's a fascinating subject. I mean, what intelligent forces behind these objects that's neutralizing, deactivating, or messing around with thermonuclear weapons. It's a big story that we haven't even talked about yet.
Well, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come visit
Oh, thank you.
with me. I'm sorry Dave wasn't able to join us.
No
because he
problem.
was very into this subject, but please consider coming back
Sure.
sometime. We'll send us any kind of promotional materials on your books. We'd be more than happy to advertise that. We'll distill this conversation down to a YouTube video, and when it's ready to be uploaded to YouTube, we'll send you a copy of that. But I really enjoyed our conversation. I appreciate that. And something I just thought about. You may or may not know Katie Grabowski. Is that name familiar to you?
Very familiar.
Okay, so we did a show with her about where she grew up, which is in Colorado. I'm not sure where Kiowa is, yeah, I guess it's Kiowa. But that might be an interesting place that you haven't talked with her or haven't done any research. That's a pretty strange place with a lot of different things going on there. So it sounds like you maybe already have some familiarity.
I think I've crossed paths with Katie, maybe at conferences or something. It's a very familiar name. She's right. She's from Colorado. What was she studying? Head of MUFON, right. There's, look, Daniel, going back again to stigma and control and fringe science, there's a lot of things that do happen that we don't hear about for a variety of reasons. And it could be because people don't want to talk about it. They're afraid of losing their jobs or whatever. But I mean, these things do happen. And we learned about this from the OSAP program, that the Bigelow Aerospace that was contracted by, the OSAP program from the Pentagon from 2008 to 2010. It was a UFO study program, but they were also looking at anomalies, cryptids. They studied Skinwalker Ranch, but they studied other places. Some of them were in Colorado. Some of them were in your state on the east slopes of the Cascades, areas where you had a lot of these phenomena happening. But we never heard about a lot of this until recently. So I wouldn't be surprised that this is more common than we're told. It's just that people are, realistically, they're afraid of the consequences if they, in their small town, if they start talking about what they've seen, or pilots losing their jobs, so forth.
That stigma you're talking about.
It's very important.
Simeon, thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Daniel.
Yeah, take care of yourself.
Yeah, take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.